Thank you all for being here. It's sleepy afternoon time. I'm grateful that all of you are here, awake. I think we're just going to jump right in. I have in my hand, of course, our object of focus. I invite all of you to judge this book by its cover. It's a beautiful cover for a beautiful book. And I wanted to kick off the conversation, if we can just dive right into it. The title, which is something that I thought quite a bit about when I was reading it. The Identity Project. Why?
Well, this book began as a study of Aadhaar, which is an identity project. And as I worked on this particular aspect of identity, I saw that it was connected to a larger project of who is an Indian, who is Hindu, and other such questions. And after I was done, I think this reporting took about 7 years to do. I think there was only one way to sort of describe what I had found, which was it was all an identity project. Which part of it described? So I think it plays three different ways, really, 2 or 3 different ways. One is technology, the other is cultural, and the third is religious. So all of them came together in that way. Yeah.
And I think that it's very apt. And I think many of you may have noticed that there's been a real spate of books on Modi's India, India in the, well, not necessarily just the Modi era, but everything also that underlies the Modi era, the bedrock of the RSS's organization and ideology, and from there to the present moment. This one, I must say, stands out. It's a bit of a spoiler, but I don't think it actually spoils the book for anybody to say that what Rahul has done here is kept his eye very firmly on Aadhaar, which, of course, when Aadhaar was first being, I think fair to say, shoved down all of our throats, there were questions of how it might be used in communal terms as well. Now, all of those questions have kind of died away. Now it's all Aadhaar, digital India, UPI, etc. And I think that we've really lost sight of the deeper reasons, perhaps, or the deeper dangers, I should say, of why Aadhaar exists. You put that very much front and center. And like you're saying, that there is a cultural and a religious project underway, but you also make sure that you do not lose sight of Aadhaar in the longer term. Talk us through that, the roots of Aadhaar as you uncovered them in this project through your reporting and how it all fits together.
So, as Roman said, I think many of us with long memories will remember how Aadhaar was pitched to this country. At first, it was pitched as a welfare tool. It allows us to sort of get benefits to beneficiaries. That was the first thing. But then along the way, there were these other use cases that emerged. They found a criminal because of Aadhaar. They found a missing child because of Aadhaar. So all these other use cases started popping up in the media. And then, of course, there was this thing where children required Aadhaar. There were schools that would call up and say, why doesn't your child have an Aadhaar? There was a bank that would call you and say, well, if you don't have an Aadhaar, we're going to have to freeze your account. Or a phone company that came in and said, we'll have to disconnect your number if you don't have an Aadhaar. So as a journalist, I was sitting outside looking at all of this and saying, what is going on? Because it's not one solution. And when there are many solutions and many rationales sort of doing the rounds, I'm skeptical and I'm suddenly suspicious. And what's the real story over here? Somebody is propagating these various stories. So let's go look at them. So I quit my job. And I was an investigative reporter at Reuters. There were 2 of us in India. I left and said, let me just go look at Aadhaar and I'll probably get a book out of it. So I sat and reported on it for 3 years. This was from, say, around 2017 to the end of 2019 at some point when CAA NRC actually happened. Now, I was really reporting on technology, on this case going through the courts, on the activists versus the technologists in Kormangala, which is Mr. Nilekani and other people. And I was just not getting the larger picture. I saw, I was listening to what the activists were saying about these wild stories about the World Bank and about an international coalition that was behind all of these things, not just in India but across the world. And you're skeptical of that too. It's not really making sense, and you can't really, as a journalist, I've got to piece this narrative together in a way that is coherent for my readers. So I was looking at all of this, and at a certain point, I had a stroke of luck. I met a person I found a person who had designed a version of Aadhaar 10 years before Aadhaar was introduced. So Aadhaar came out in about 2009. This person had designed a version of Aadhaar or something like Aadhaar back in the year 2000. And so when I went to Delhi and I met him at his house, which was as large as a farmhouse in central Delhi, he told me that Mr. LK Advani was interested in identification, and therefore, because of that, he built this project. And then because it was Mr. LK Advani, the question that I had was, why is Mr. LK Advani interested in an identification project? And so from that, I had to pull backwards in time. And it went suddenly, I could see this whole world opening up. It went from being a story about technology, which was a very narrow story, to suddenly become something far more substantial. It became about the context in which all of it was coming together. And it just so happened that the context was nationalistic, it was religious, it had an ethno-nationalist aspect to it, which was, the RSS was actually at the heart of it. And so that's how this whole thing came together. And then, when you do this kind of reporting, I think for 3 years, you're just interviewing people and looking at documents non-stop. I'm also reluctant to let go of that reporting. Even as the book is growing bigger, I'm holding on to all the material that I have and saying, oh God, this book is going somewhere else suddenly. How do I hold on to it and still make it part of this book? So luckily, I sort of found a way, which was, it was through sort of showing you how our ideas of exclusion actually affect people today. This book starts off with the CAA NRC violence in New Delhi in February 2020. And then from there, I take you to the past, where I show you how these attitudes and ideas that people have about Muslims and religion and the Hindu supremacy, how they actually started with the Arya Samaj. And then I slowly bring you back to the present and show you how technology sort of affects your society. I think it was more and more important for me as I was telling the story, because I felt like people were really not seeing the larger picture of technology. We tend to sort of accept a lot of what is in the papers and what is just told to us by some famous person who we sort of trust because he's seen as incorruptible or he has enough money. So what more could he really need? But I think as citizens, once you start to question things, you start to see that the explanations you're given are really, they're not enough. They don't make sense. And so that was what I was trying to do. I just tried to answer all the questions in my head.
No, and I think that that's a fair encapsulation of what the book does. I think I was describing the book to somebody, a very famous political leader said that you have to understand the chronology around these things, right? And of course, there the chronology was CAA, NRC, all of the dangers that poses. But I think that you've drawn that chronology back to say that Aadhaar is an essential point in joining up the dots on all of this. And of course, going further back from the Arya Samaj through independence, RSS, 2002, all of these points. I want to ask though, why has that understanding, particularly of Aadhaar, been missing? I think that there were critics of Aadhaar who were raising issues with Aadhaar initially. There are many problems, this was one of them. But this seemed to be one of the first critiques or critical questions to kind of fall off the table. And I think now what this book is really doing is it's reinserting that question into the public mind and the public discourse in a very urgent way. Why did it drop off?
So, just to give you guys a little background, when Aadhaar sort of came to the forefront back in 2009 as something called unique identification, there was a core group of people who really did not quite understand what it was, but they understood what it meant as technology, as identification, as all of these things, as a tool of identification. They saw that it was extremely powerful, and they put on their social scientist hats. And they said, listen, this kind of thing traditionally in the past has led to really bad outcomes in Nazi Germany and in other places. And so but the thing is, when they talked about it in India, they're operating in an environment of low information anyways. You don't have mainstream papers that are properly looking at what a technology is, who is behind it, where is the architecture being held, what is the encryption level, is your data safe or not, who has access to it. These are not questions that they're answering or asking, and we don't even know that these questions exist as people who are subject to these things. So there were a group of experts and human rights sorts who were looking at all of these things. But when they talked about the dangers, they talked about it in a way that it felt so unfamiliar to us. It felt like they were living with conspiracies in their mind. It felt like what they were saying cannot happen. In fact, there was a meeting, I'll tell you, back in at the end of 2009 or 2010. It happened at Shimla. There were activists on one side of the table. There were Aadhaar officials on the other side of the table. And when these people said that, listen, your tool can be misused for surveillance, it can be used for oppression, the officials actually laughed and said, that's never going to happen. So they were straight away discounting all of this. Now, these officials had the ear of journalists and editors in the large papers. They were constantly talking to them, constantly wooing them, constantly in communication with them, telling them about how Aadhaar was going to be this great national project, which a country like India needed. Now, what is the time? This is 2009, 2010. We're all starting to believe in technology. Facebook is just about picking up. Google is just about picking up. People are making billions upon billions on these technologies. These are seen as hopes for the future. And Aadhaar is a part of that world in that discourse. So it just kind of dropped off. But what happened was when I started looking at the archives, I saw that, when I looked at the Delhi police records at Teen Murti, which is the Nehru Memorial Library in Delhi, I saw that way back in 1947, 1948, there were police reports of how rioters would come to them before a riot. These were rioters who had planned out a riot. They would then go to the police and say, listen, don't attack the men who are wearing white kerchiefs around their left wrist. So it was very specific. Then there were other instances where police would raid headquarters of militant groups, and they would find detailed maps of neighborhoods where a home was owned by a Muslim but was rented by a Hindu, a home that was owned by a Muslim and Muslims lived over there. So you could see that identification had always been used as for persecution. And in the Indian context, it went unpunished. Even decades later, I had not heard of anybody being punished for all of that. And so the question that was in my mind was, you essentially have a tool which is extraordinarily powerful. It is, I would argue, it is one of the most powerful tools that exists in India today, this ability to find anybody at any time, or rather to locate them in a database. If that can be used to identify people effectively, and it can be used to deliver services efficiently, then with the flick of a switch, it can also be used to deliver real brutality very efficiently. And as you know, there's really nothing to stop sort of people from brutalizing you anywhere you go in this country. So that's why I wanted to keep the focus on Aadhaar front and center, because while I don't answer all the questions of is the tool that these people designed 10 years ago, is that Aadhaar? I don't have a conclusive answer to that, but I do show through interviews with A.S. Dulat, with Mr. Advani's secretary, with the architect of this system, that they resemble each other in the way they work. So I wanted to leave that to people. But this is a conversation that we're going to be having for quite a while as Aadhaar develops and it branches out into various other databases, and we start seeing it being used for delimitation and for various other sort of government plans.
Various government plans, yes. But because we're talking so much about Aadhaar at the start of this conversation, I do also want to point out that the book Aadhaar is very much front and center, but it's not a book solely about that. I think that the grander theme, as you are already pointing out, is really what I think it's fair to argue is the central crisis facing the country, in a country which currently is facing many crises, is really the assault on the Muslim minority, Muslim identity, etc. And you go deep in terms of the excavation of that history. A lot of that also from archival research. I wanted to ask you to talk us through both that side of your reporting. I mean, there's the, let's say, people-to-people reporting, and then there's the archival reporting, and especially in terms of uncovering the deep history of anti-Muslim politics in India. What did you discover that you didn't know at the start of this whole thing?
I think pretty much everything. Everything was so when I walk into a book. I mean, I think when I at least this is my first book. When I start a subject, whether it's long form journalism or in the case of this book, I only have a certain idea, like a really small idea of what I want to explore. I am not an expert at it. I know very, very little about it. And that's why it takes me a really long time. This book took about 7 years. It takes me a long time because I am not only speaking to people and interviewing hundreds of people, I'm also really trying to frame it in a way that makes sense to me. And there are always two questions that I'm asking myself as I work on this. One is, what is this person saying in front of me? What are they telling me? What am I learning? And the other is, what is the larger context in which I am listening to this, I'm hearing this, and this person themselves? What do they know about, and what does it say about India at large or society at large? So this is how I had approached the book. Now, what did I learn throughout this? I learned that when people look at politics, they tend to take a very narrow view of things. We don't really look at how societies are changed over decades, which I think is far more important than who wins and who loses on June 4th, 2024, which is also why I don't share that kind of optimism that a lot of people had about June 4th. I think the problems are deeper. That was what I saw through my reporting for this book in the archives especially. I saw that there is a kind of extremism that exists in society, a sort of conservatism, let me just call it, in society, which has not been addressed. We don't even know why it exists yet, and we don't know how it is propagated. We have some ideas. We know that it's going to take a lot to sort of de-radicalize society, as it were. This book really, I think, it doesn't follow the chronology of my reporting. I started with Aadhaar, but Aadhaar actually comes in about 2/3 of the way through the book. This book actually begins with the riots themselves. The pandemic was on at that time. I could not see for myself. And so I always had this guilt, like for about a year or 2 years, that something major had happened in Delhi. I was not a part of it. I needed to see it. So I go back I start recreating what happened, the violence against Muslims. It feels important to me. I'm not sure how it's connected to Aadhaar, but it feels important. And so I go back, I start talking to people, I rebuild various scenes. I go talk to cops, I talk to riot victims. Along the way, I find the person who becomes the heart of this book, a Muslim man, a small-time trader by the name of Nisar Ahmed. Nisar Ahmed's house has been burnt down. He nearly dies in an attack on him and his family. And the people who are doing the attacking are these children who have grown up in front of him. They find him, they locate him, they nearly kill him when one of them steps out of the crowd and says, "Nobody will attack this person," and they let him go. He is saved by the skin of his teeth. And he runs away. But he decides that he's not going to hide. He decides that he's not going to give up. And so it starts this process after the riots of where he's trying to find justice in the courts, but he's also trying to provide his testimony. All of this, I was there to sit down and document. I kept following him to the courts. I kept hanging out with him and his family, a little bit with his sons, but walked through Mustafabad with him. Saw how nervous he was when he was out on the street. And it started telling me in hanging out with him that there was something deeper going on, not just with him, but with the country around him. And this was something that he kept talking about. Late at night, he would call me up and he'd say, "I don't know what's going on with this country. I love it, but it seems like everybody has gone slightly mad. And I don't know where the madness is coming from. I don't know." He uses the word zeher a lot, poison. And he said, "Where is the zeher coming from?" And that's a question that I started wondering. I started looking at his phone and saw the kind of hate-filled messages he was receiving, the videos he would get. And so when I asked that question of where is it coming from, the only way to really look at it was to look at the archives. I didn't think I would find an answer, a modern answer. I would find a very unsatisfying answer, because hate did not start 10 years ago. It existed before that. And I had to understand why people had certain ideas about their country and about their religion and all of that. And so I went back to the past and started spending as much time as I could in the archives. There I did, word searches. I approached it as a journalist would, which is, let me just go find some words, let me go find some names, and I will start making connections. It's not an approach that scholars recommend, but it's an approach that worked for me also because it came from me. So when I started doing all of that, more and more questions emerged, more themes emerged. Nehru's utter helplessness, as Dhirendra put it, in 1947, in September 1947, I could start to see that. I could start to see him mentioning the RSS as being at the heart of a lot of unrest in Delhi. And so at one level, I was looking at Advani through Aadhaar, and then over here, Nehru is mentioning the RSS. And so I knew that somewhere I was creating markers for myself. Here is the RSS with Nehru. Here is RSS with Aadhaar. And I have to start filling in the blanks and see how are these things connected to each other. And so I started spending a lot of time in various archives. I had a fellowship. I went abroad. And so abroad, I went to as many libraries as I could and dug up as many documents as I could, put them on a database, searched them all, and then saw that I was able to create a coherent narrative that not only made sense to me, but which, when I showed historians, said, yes, that's about right. And so along the way, I could see that I was not just dealing with names such as the RSS, I was dealing with misinformation, a lot of misinformation that our family members get on their phones. I could see earlier versions of it doing the rounds in Delhi on pamphlets, the same thing. The same kind of letters by Muslim leaders where they're saying, on this day at this time, we will attack and we will take these many Hindu women hostage. Unbelievable kind of messages. And you kind of sense that they had the same provenance. They came from the same place. And so I was pulling all of these things together. They became part of the book. At the same time, as Indians, I think you're also living through the history of this country, since this is such a young country. I brought my own family into it because ours is a partition family. And so I brought them into it. I brought the investigative aspect into it. And so there were several ways of approaching this book, and I have a bunch of skills. So I just threw everything into the book. That's how this thing came together.
I think one of the things you do bring out very well, and I'm not going to remember the exact quote, but there's a part where almost verbatim you say that the RSS has not been doing anything new in decades. That a lot of the modus operandi, if you can call it that, of the kind of misinformation. The medium has changed. It's gone from pamphlets to WhatsApp. But fundamentally, the kind of misinformation that they've been, like the example that you just gave, fake pamphlets saying some Muslim community is getting ready to rampage through this neighborhood or to capture all your women, etc., etc. There's a couple of other things, I think, just in terms of how you capture what the RSS is and what the RSS does. One thing that really stayed with me, which I wanted to point out, I think, and this is coming from... Oh, I lost my place. I'm sorry. This is coming from Alok Rai, who is a scholar of Hindi nationalism, I think, right? But also many other things. And he has a definition that you lean on of the RSS as an aggregator of
grievances,
an aggregator of resentment.
Resentment, yes.
I wanted to ask you to unpack that for us, how you understand it.
So I was trying to, as I was trying to understand what the RSS is, I went and met the scholar Alok Rai at his home in Allahabad. And he just said offhanded that this organization aggregates grievances and resentments very, very well. And I just sat back and thought about what it meant and what a great definition it was. It is a large organization, and we make the mistake of seeing it as a monolithic organization. It is not. What it is saying in one village over here in Wayanad is very different from what it's saying in another village about 100 kilometers away. It picks up on basically fault lines. It finds those fault lines and it exploits them beautifully in a way that has been tried and tested over a century now. I think for a century now. So, which explains why in some parts of India, beef is perfectly acceptable, and in other parts of India, it's not acceptable. It really is all about political power and about what grievance can I exploit to sort of strengthen my own position in this particular area. At the end of the day, if you look at this organization, what does it really do? It listens to people. It listens to their unhappinesses. It listens to the things that it listens for things that they don't have. And it works to provide them. It works to provide physical things. It works to provide, say, if you need a math tutor, it will help you out. If you need cash, I think it'll help tide you over for a little while. It'll give you aid. In times of duress, it will be there for you. It is essentially the last mile provider that this government wishes it was. So it's always there. It's always there. And so this aggregator of resentment, this is a part of that. They're listening. They're there at the last mile telling you, we're there for you. And I think that is where they derive their power. That, and of course the mistruths and the lies and all of the other stuff. That it all adds up. It all adds up. It reinforces certain things. It shows you that we're here listening and we're here providing. And I think that is an extremely powerful role that it ends up playing. So I think that's what I picked up from all my reporting over here. I can't tell you, it seems like a really simple thing to say. But when you're there, when you're on the ground, when you're listening to RSS volunteers, when you're watching them in action, when you're looking at children standing next to them in shakhas and looking up to adults talking about how they rescued some girl from here or beat back Muslim boys over there, and you see the look in these children's eyes, you realize that, these kids are getting sucked into this. They're going to believe in it. And so, the Indian public at large also reacts in a similar situation, because those are the stories they get. That is the version of events they get. And I think the RSS does that very effectively.
One of the things I think that Rahul does very well in the book is he takes you right into a shakha. I think that's one of the most memorable passages of reportage, I think, in this book or elsewhere that I've read in recent times. And there's a lot more to commend this book, but I would say even only for that, everyone should buy it and read it. And those two children that you were just talking about, two boys of a shakha member who are almost against their will, because they're children, dragged to shakha every morning to sit there and listen to the conversation, they really stuck with me too. And one thing that I remember thinking about those two children as I read this, in the context of your book, is that you catch people at various stages of radicalization. I think maybe those two boys are at the very, very start. You encounter and describe many people on many stages of that spectrum. You also speak to people who are on the other side, former RSS members, one in particular who is highly memorable, who is now de-radicalized.
Yes.
What did you learn about that process, both the radicalization and then the de-radicalization?
The interesting thing is that most people who are radicalized, they don't really realize that they're being radicalized. It is a lot of received wisdom, and it addresses biases and prejudices that they already have, that they really don't feel there's anything wrong in expressing. So what groups like the RSS really do is, again, it goes back to this thing that I was mentioning to you about how they're always there for you. In a country like India, where you really don't have safety nets, they are a safety net. And I think we have to acknowledge that at some level. That plays a very large role in their success. So they're over there. They make sure that when they come to you the first time, and this was what former members told me, when they come to you the first time, they make that first approach, they are not talking politics. They're not talking about shakha this or Congress that or BJP this. They're not talking about culture. They're saying, what do you need? And if you need a math tutor, they'll somehow from their network, they'll pull out a math tutor and they'll say, this person will sit with your son twice a week, thrice a week, and he will teach your son. And you don't have to worry about the money. It's important that your son, progresses, proceeds well in their life. And so you get to know them. They get to know you. And over a period of time, what tends to happen is then they will come and visit your home again. They'll say, invite us for chai. And this family will be like, oh, the shakha member has said that they'd like to come home for chai, so it's an event. And so they will come home. They will get to know the family. They will find their way in. They will find what the family needs after that. And they will be a constant presence. And then eventually will come the ask, this child, why don't you send him to the shakha? If you guys have to work, go work. We're all outstanding citizens over here. By that time, in the parents' minds, these are good people. And so there's nothing wrong with sending them to the shakha. For if you don't know what a shakha is, I'm sorry, I'm just very briefly going to tell you. It's like a community center. It can be over here in this place. It can be over here next door. It is essentially a place where people hang out in the morning and do exercises and have chats about myths and legends and whatnot. And in the evening, it's a place where people gather and play. Children come over there and play. And so it becomes a public space. And there are adults who are seen as responsible. And so family members let them in. And the kids then become part of this discourse that is taking place within a shakha. And the discourse is invariably about culture, about religion, about saving Hindu women from Muslim men and all of that. And so what these kids don't really have is that voice which is critical. Yeah, and I don't mean critical as in criticizing the RSS or anything, but that critical voice that says, this is not quite right, or finds the logical flaw in these arguments. That voice is not really present over there in these things. And so kids grow up within them. They become a part of the shakha. They may rise within the shakha. They'll rise within the organization. All of that. So that is what I saw at the early part of it. I also, in this book, I think Roman mentioned this, I spoke to people who had de-radicalized themselves over a period of time. And I think they got lucky. These are people who had a presence in their lives. I think it was, in one case, it was a mother, in another, it was a father, who told them that don't really believe everything that these people tell you. And that voice stayed with them throughout. That voice, you never really know when. They were part of a shakha for a long time. They were part of the RSS for a long time. In one case, I think it was about 16 years or so, this person was with the RSS and was there during the emergency and really played a role that he did not really describe to me. I think he felt uncomfortable describing to me, but he told me enough about what life was like inside. I think that voice, his mother's voice, which existed within him as a child, it came out at just the right time for him to realize that he did not want to be a part of this anymore. He could see through the propaganda and he walked away from it. So where that voice is coming from, whose voice that is, I think these are very important questions. And I think something we'll all have to deal with as we deal with the effects of people who have been through the shakha system and who, more importantly, are sympathetic to this conservative cause of the RSS.
While you're in the shakha, you're challenged by one shakha member, and at some point you are pushed to give your solution, or rather, I think you offer your prescription on maybe two things that can lead the country out of this mess. If I remember correctly, you say critical thinking, which you've described. You also say true media. I don't know if that's the exact term you use, but as an alternative to fake media. The latter part of that, why is that part of your prescription for the way out of this?
So I think there's a dearth of voices in this country. I think when we look at the RSS, I mean, I'm not just talking about. Sorry, let me just restate that. Sorry, I said true media in the spur of the moment because it was the exact opposite of like fake media. That was the first thing that came in my head. And eventually, as I was writing it, I said, well, Rahul, this makes you look really silly. But then I decided to put it in any case. It felt like it happened. And so I had to tell you about it. But I was thinking about that because these were people who were talking about Kerala story in front of me. And they were like, man, Kerala story, amazing. I could see how they were using it. They were using clips and they were sending these things on WhatsApp. And they were totally believing all this stuff. Or at least in front of me, they believed all of it. Maybe behind, once they close the door, I'm outside on the other side. They say, well, obviously it's not true. But they say these things. And so I said that if you don't have media that kind of explains your situation to you, that doesn't explain that there is a kind of shared reality that we all have. If that shared reality is something that is broken and is not, we don't have a sense of it, then there's a problem. We're going to argue about facts. We're going to argue about what happened. Forget what happened 500 years ago. We're going to not know what happened yesterday. So I think I was looking at it from that perspective. That was the first part of it. What was the second? The other?
Really just about where you see the media's role in guiding us out of all of this.
I don't think it's happening. I think at some level the way the business models of media in India work right now means that mainstream media is reliant on government advertising. People are not paying for this by themselves. Independent media cannot be supported by subscriptions and donations alone. And these mainstream media organizations are the largest mouthpieces there are. So expecting them to suddenly turn around and say, well, we're going to become combative and we're going to challenge the government, I think is unrealistic. I think that New models are required. What those models are, I don't really know. I don't know if, again, facts are the way to go with people. I don't see any other way. But I also think that at some level, people don't really question media often enough. And I don't just mean sending out a tweet and saying, hey, you idiot. Not like that online. It's more like, do you write letters to editors of paper? Do you apply pressure? Do you know that you all have a certain amount of power that you're not using by not using your voices? So I think at some level, we've not really exhausted the options before us. And it comes down to us at the end of the day. We tend to be recipients of our reality rather than believing that we can actually shape what's happening around us. And I think the moment you realize that you actually wield an enormous amount of power, which is something that the RSS knows. People, for all you say about these guys, they know that they can influence events if enough of them speak up. They really do shape the momentum. They shift the momentum. They move conversations along in ways that we may not like, but they are fighting for an idea of India. And a lot of people among us, friends, family, we don't. We write about what's happening around us, but we don't shape events. So I think these are roles that we have to play. It really does come down to us.
I want to also take the conversation a little bit beyond just the book itself. We're already talking about de-radicalization, but I think that one would hope that at some point, maybe in our lifetimes, maybe beyond, there comes a point where there is a de-RSSification of India. Given how deep the roots of the organization are and how deep its ideology has been seeping into society, that cannot be an easy process. Dhiren, you were describing fascism and the three pillars of fascism. I think the third one you mentioned was the glorification of war. History's sad example is that oftentimes fascist societies only wake up after absolute catastrophe in warfare, Nazi Germany being the obvious example. We would hope that India perhaps will avoid that fate or any other internal catastrophe that might also lead to a similar wake-up. What would it look like? I mean, I think that this is a very difficult question for all of us, and probably a question, in a way, ahead of its time. I think that the battles in front of us are right now very immediate and very daily and not looking at the larger structure of things. But I'm curious if after 7 years of really digging deep on this, you've been thinking about this question as well.
I have been thinking about this question quite a lot. And it comes entirely out of my reporting. These are not thoughts that I imagined or anything, but as I was looking at people, talking to them, I wondered whether whether the solution or part of the solution lies in, say, for example, women's employment, helping that along, for example, creating daycare centers, proper daycare centers where they can leave children so that children are not left at a shakha. I know that right now in Kerala, there are sort of efforts to sort of build more daycare centers over here. And I think monitoring those daycare centers and essentially seeing who's looking after children, getting through to children early. Like one of the things that Alt News is doing right now is building programs to get through to young children, teaching them how to identify misinformation. And at least how to, helping people build that little antenna of theirs. So I think you really start young and you work your way up from there. But I also feel that there are so many different ways of doing it. It'll take like a multidisciplinary approach with people who know law, with people who know justice, with people who work with the police, with young sort of legislative assistants, with people who study the media. It really will require a multi-pronged approach. And while the brain power exists, I'm not sure that it's been tapped in that particular way. So I think we've had to, it's high time we began that conversation. That's where I'm at right now, Roman.
And pushing beyond the book once again, I think here we are. Some of us at the age and the stages in our lives where we can be writing our own books. A lot of young minds who we would hope will go on to be the next generation of people writing those books. We started this conversation also, I was talking about the spate of books that there has been on the RSS, on Modi's India, on the new India as it's being described. A lot of those books are treading familiar ground at this point, or similar ground. Yours, I think, goes several steps beyond, both in terms of the depth of the reportage, but also, for instance, in how you're bringing Aadhaar very firmly back into the frame. But it does feel like, at least in the English language, a lot of the books have arrived at a certain depth and style of understanding the RSS and what's underway in India. What next? Having worked on this book, on this theme for 7 years, in terms of showing the rest of India, the rest of the world, what is happening in the country, what are those books that you saw along the way, or the opportunities you saw along the way for the next books, the next set of books that needs to be written?
I would straight away look at the RSS and the judiciary. I think the RSS and the judiciary is something that I would be very interested in knowing more about. From a reportage perspective, I would love to see the RSS in education, a more reported study of what's happening to children's minds in school, and how, I can totally imagine a great book about following a child as they enter the RSS school system and seeing what happens to them over 11 years. Just that kind of really close study. I would love to see something about the RSS, well, not just the RSS, but also conservatism in police, and how that actually plays out on the ground, how that affects our notions of justice itself. And then again, the idea of a Hindu Rashtra. What does that actually mean? What does it mean on the ground in day-to-day living? I would love to see more reportage about these things. I would love to see more about the money flows and about how donations sort of come in from across borders and what they are used for. I'm very interested in knowing more about the interior lives of a lot of vigilante groups that exist. Do they sort of, what happens? How is joblessness affecting all of these other things? Is it giving them a boost in the arm? Is there something more nuanced going on with them? So these are questions that I haven't. But all I have is questions now that I'm done with my book. I'm just hoping somebody else takes up these questions.
We are running short on time, so I also want to make sure that we leave enough time for everybody else to ask their questions as well. So I'm just going to open it up. Any questions to Rahul, please?
It's not a question, just a comment. When you talked about the shakas, except for the hatred part, it sounded like the Chinese Communist Party. And therefore, I'm now not surprised that when the Chinese Communist Party gave an invitation to the RSS to come and study their cadre schools, they gladly accepted it and went. So things are falling to piece together now. Second point I wanted to comment is, when you talked about white handkerchiefs, this is something everybody here might know, that during the Gujarat riots, my younger law school students had done research on it. The rioters who went, had gas supplier lists from which they identified the Muslim families and went and, so they had these information on hand when they did it. Of course, it's so pathetic. They burnt all the evidence, nothing could be done. But the evidence came back in a very sick form. They videotaped all the brutality, murders and rapes and watched it in their living room. And that's the most frightful part of where this will go. And the last point is about letters to the editor. I was in Madras during the Babri Masjid movement, and there was a lot of counter movement working on it. And after a large meeting in one of the big halls in Madras, when we, the organizers, came out, we discovered there were letters to the editor clubs run by the Hindu right wing in Madras to make sure that letters to editors could go the very next day. So whenever I talk to my students, I tell them, at least write letters to the editor. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
There's a question back there.
Fantastic session. Thank you very much. You alluded about radicalization of the society. I'm just looking at the political process. The political process can only reflect what the society thinks or reflects. So, we blame the opposition without probably understanding the deeper problem which they are facing. Do you think the society will get out of this mindset, which kind of asked us a question, but I just wanted you to look at the political level of how this radicalization of both the society as well as the administrative apparatus, including judiciary, reflect at a political level?
I really can't answer that question just because I'm not qualified to. As such, I don't know how long these transformations take. But just looking around at other societies that have changed and have, if not de-radicalized, then successfully sort of suppressed that radicalization, and other movements have been allowed to sort of emerge and flourish. It's possible. It's possible. Why not? I think when I look at if you must look at, say, the political effect of an economic crisis, say joblessness, one could argue that that June 4th was about that it wasn't about we're tired of polarization and all of that, but it was the joblessness talking, like it was speaking to us electorally, politically. And I think at some level it's such a complicated country, this one, that I don't know where it's going to come from. I'm sure it's going to come from somewhere. This expression that enough of this for a little while, let's just work on the other problems, and that in itself may lead to certain other changes. Nothing is written in stone. That's what I'm seeing. And just as there has been a push by the RSS for 100 years to make the kind of country they want, there are enough people over here and outside this group and across the country that in their own little way are waging little wars of resistance. I mean, you just don't see them. You don't know them. We don't know of our shared reality because it's not being covered in a particular way. And there's no coherent thread that connects us right now. But you never know where it'll come from.
I find that a lot in the local Kannada media, for example. On Facebook, there are any number of people, Dalit groupings, who oppose them. And another thing is, if the RSS tries to attack the constitution, that is going to be a big movement. And the reservation as well. People are not going to take it. I'm very sure of it, actually. The resistance will come. And in Karnataka, they are trying to find small communities, wealthy communities. Like I come from Coorg, actually, and they actually started to work long back, and through Chinmayananda movements, Chinmayananda, RSS used to come and they would organize Chinmayananda's classes on Bhagavad Gita. I have attended some of them. Okay, and these upper class people will come, the high society, high so as we call the high so people. They come and they attend these classes, and gradually they're attracted, because ours is a community that rejected Brahminism. We have no use for them at all in the Kodwa society. But today our people are carrying trishuls, little children are carrying trishuls, and Kodwa women are wearing saffron saris and holding and shouting slogans against Muslims. This has never happened. We used to share food with the Muslims, with the Mohapllas earlier. When I was a child, there was a lot of exchange of food between they didn't eat pork, but ours is a pork eating community. But we'll cook mutton for them and they'll come during our harvest festival, eat in our houses. These things have stopped in Coorg. What I'm saying is, but the real resistance will come from the Dalit groups, not so much the tribal population, I think. I'm not sure, but Dalits will pose a problem, I think.
Yeah, namaste. Congratulations for your book. I would like to pursue it soon. Pros and cons of Aadhaar. But my question is, as in the title, what is New India? Is this a India? Is it a train running with fake propagandas, like what is happening in Manipur since months? Huge corruption in bureaucracy, politics, and you are already going to touch judiciary as well. Or is there a pinch of hope in this land? Because government and all are only supporting the minority who are extremely rich. Amendments and rules and laws against the majority, like farmers and the grassroots people, millions of displacements in the Adivasi and all these belt. So where should I find a pinch of hope being a young person? Second is
WLF, at the WLF.
Second is I think I need a bit clarification on you said RSS as a safeguard. I understood your point, but still a bit more clarification will be great. Thank you. Thank you, Roman Bhaiya.
Thanks. So look, when I say the new India, that's the alternate title of the book outside India is it's the new India. I think the phrase was used in a very triumphalist way. And I wanted to show that, look, this is an India that I am seeing as a reporter as well. There is the other stuff, the economic growth and all of the other stuff. But there is this, at some level, there are people at the heart of it who are not happy. And there is this rising sort of animosity, which I wanted to document. I think it's important to write about it and present it in a coherent way. So that's what I meant to do over here. Honestly, I think as I was writing the book, I was really, really happy with what I was seeing. Not in terms of the violence of it, which is very depressing, but look at the number of people who were fighting back in their own way. There was this guy going to the courts over and over again at his own expense, saying, I will put my testimony on the record. There's a woman who's saying that Aadhaar is going to be a problem, and she pulls together a coalition. This is the legal scholar Usha Ramanathan, who basically pulls everybody together and creates a coherent case against Aadhaar. And there is a dissent by Justice Chandrachud, which may become much more significant in the future. So I have a lot to. I am quite optimistic about it, because I can not only see that people are breathing, kicking, screaming, and going into whatever future this country is dragging them to, but that idea of a different kind of India is not dead yet. It's alive. People want it. And so I was really optimistic as I wrote the book. And at some level, when people told me that, well, it's hard sometimes to read this, I'm like, no, get to the end of the book. You will actually feel pretty optimistic by the end of it, because you'll see all these people fighting. This thing about the RSS, I didn't understand that bit that you just said. It's a safety net. It provides a safety net for people. So look, we live in a country where last mile services are not available. People can't access a hospital. They can't access public health care. They're not getting their rations. All of these things are denied to them. So what the RSS really does is it says, hey, hang on, I've got this network over here. Let me give you what you need. So if you need a math tutor, I will get you the math tutor. So that's what I mean by that. It's that these small things go a long way in building support for the organization. it's a decentralized organization. There are people who receive benefits don't always see that it's the same people who are sort of committing whatever, and also there's another part to it, which is often in riot hit areas, people will tell you that the people who were rioting came from outside. So they're not, you don't really see, the connection is not always apparent immediately.
I think we have the time for one last question.
So an activist from Muslim Students of Union of Assam. So he had alleged that RSS kind of set a target of how many foreign tribunal notice need to be sent. And then they just forward it to border police. And they send it to random people. So there are examples also. So you can't really dismiss it as an allegation. So personally, I knew a story of a person who received the foreign tribunal notice 4 years after his suicide. So he was wrongfully sent the notice. Then fearing that, he committed suicide. Then after 4 years, his family received the notice asking the person, this dead person, to be present in front of the foreign tribunal and to prove his citizenship. And there is cases of a soldier who was working in Manipur and who received a foreign tribunal notice, and a border police, they gave a statement in court that this person received the notice and he put his signature. But actually, at that time, he was in Manipur. So a lot of those people, those ground activists who are dealing with these cases, they are saying that this is like a planned project. These people are really giving a target and then just forwarding it to border police or whoever, and even the local Assam police is also involved. So in Guwahati, they are just, as a part of this random interrogation, they're just collecting names of those street dwellers and these hawkers and all other, basically this lower caste and lower class Muslims who are working in the city and all. They're just collecting random names, then sending notice. And so there is, this, we all know that NRC, so earlier that, so in Kerala, basically, so while this protest was happening in Kerala, so many people had dismissed that it's just like a distraction tactic. This NRC is not going to happen. But our Home Minister himself, he said that he will implement NRC nationwide. So during your research or this archival research and all, did you come across any such thing that RSS giving
No.
This thing?
No, I didn't.
And do you think that it can happen? Means they giving a data set?
I don't know, to be honest. Look, the book was reported completely on everything that I saw, everything that I noticed in the archives. That was the only thing that I put in over there. With something like this, I would be interested in knowing more, and then kind of seeing if there's a way to sort of report on it. But can it happen? I don't know just now. I mean, it's not that I don't believe you or anything of the sort. It's just, it's
like an allegation, but they're like saying that they're also stating some examples and saying that this can happen. So.
I don't know, because I haven't heard of this before. So I think one would just have to go and sort of do some groundwork and see whether it's, how often has it happened? Who has it happened to? All of that. You'll just have to put it together. So, thank you.
Great session.